Hi everyone, and Jerry here. In the Toronto Afrofuturists series, I interview Toronto Afrofuturists, people who are writing, building, creating, teaching in Toronto, which, as some of you may know, is actually one of the Afrofuturism capitals of the world. I mean, according to me. So, my second guest is Fiona Raye Clarke. Fiona Raye Clarke is amazing. She is an award winning Trinidadian Canadian writer and community engaged artist. She's the editor of Bazodi, an anthology dedicated to Black youth, published in 2012, and Black Like We, Troubleshooting the Black Youth Experience, published in 2018, which won the Artreach Youth Arts Pitch Contest. Her writing has appeared online and in print in the Puritan Town Crier, the Room Magazine blog, Art.Theatre, among others. Her plays have been produced by the Rock Paper Sisters Festival and Inspira TO Festival, and her co-created short films screened at the Caribbean Tales International Film Festival and the San Francisco Queer National Arts Festival. She is an alumnus of the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity and the artistic director of the Black Youth Oral History Theater Project, Intergenerational. She is an editorial board member for Cantheus, a mentor in residence at Neighborhood Arts Network, and her co-created kids television animated series, Mixed Up, was awarded the CBC, Radio-Canada, and Canada Council for the Arts Creation Accelerator funding and is currently in pre-production. I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Fiona Raye Clarke. So first of all, thank you for being the second person that I've interviewed for the Toronto Afrofuturist series. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this series is because I felt that it was important that people in the world knew that there are many people who write Afrofuturist work in Toronto and that it's a thriving and growing community and a very supportive community. And that I wanted people to know all the amazing people that are in Toronto. So you are obviously one of them. And what I love about you is that you bring people up as you move, right? Lifting as you climb. And I see that as your teaching work and your writer as mentor, writer as inspiration, even while you yourself are doing so many things, not only writing, but creating television programs, and even more, right? So I just feel like this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to get to know more about what you do and to share that with others. So I really appreciate it, Fiona. So I would just want to start with the basics. I want to start with words, because Afrofuturism, as I'm sure you know, is a contested term at this point. And not everybody uses it. There's a debate as to whether it's is Afrofuturism a genre or not? Should we even be using Afrofuturism? Is it too focused on the American context? What does it mean for us to be in Toronto of Caribbean descent, using this word right now and all of that? So given that all of that is in the air, what does Afrofuturism mean to you at this moment?
Right. To me, it's a movement. It's a lifestyle in some cases. And like for me, I take a lot of inspiration from Nalo Hopkinson, who brought it to Toronto, who brought it to Caribbean culture very explicitly. And so I don't think that that term leaves me out. I think it includes the fullness of myself with different writers like Octavia Butler, it not just being an American kind of offshoot. I think that we are, as children of the diaspora, able to fully embrace this movement and this genre. And for me, it's kind of a complicated history story, because for me, I think, you know, even things that people are doing looking back. So like, I don't know if you know Son of Baldwin, Robert Jones, like his new book.
I don't, and I'd love to know.
It is actually here, The Prophets.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, his book, The Prophets, while it's not strictly Afrofuturism, because it's kind of like a story around slavery and like plantation life and that kind of thing, but it's like explicitly queer, beautiful, stunning, and to me, like works that reimagine that time and give voice to those kinds of stories is Afrofuturism, because to me, Afrofuturism is like all of the history and all of the stories and all of the lives that were stolen from us that we can reclaim and retell and celebrate. So like for me, it's not just about the future per se, it's also about reclaiming that past and telling it with magic and beauty and pathos and empathy and queerness.
I really appreciate that, because really in the future that I imagine, our past would look different, right? Like in the future that I deserve, our past and the stories, the narratives of the enslavement of African peoples would be queer, right? That's what the future me deserves in terms of a past. And Nisi Shawl talks about Afro-retrofuturism as a term to kind of describe their work, in particular Everfair, where they're taking up the colonization of an African nation and totally steampunking it, queering it, magicking it, and all of that, and they see that as a part of the work. So after this, I want to get the name and the author of that book, and I'll probably mine you for recommendations, because I haven't heard of that and I want to read it, because I'm actually somebody, I actually love reading books about the times when African people were enslaved. I love reading books that in which authors rewrite that story, right? And some people have a problem with it because it's focusing on trauma, and I think that it can be refreshing and liberating to just take responsibility for making the past different, which is something that we're told we can't do because of the linearity of time, right? So
yes, yeah.
So for you, you are very clear in your bio and in the work that you do that you are a queer woman. You're very clear about being Trinidadian, Canadian. I'm a queer woman and I'm Trinidadian, Canadian. And so when I learned about your work and who you were, I was extremely excited, because I was like, I've never met anyone who's like closer to being an age peer, who shares all of these different identities, who's like, doing this work, right? So how do those identities that you hold shape what you write, and maybe even shape how you teach new writers to own their voices?
Yeah, so for me, queerness shows up a lot in my writing. Like I like to kind of, I'm currently working on a book that I've been working on for a long time, a novel and stories that's currently titled Maldiction. And for me, it's like, it's kind of like a retelling of my own family's story, but queer lens. And it imagines like all kinds of like magic and different kinds of loves and different kinds of ways of my ancestors coming to being, up to my present time. And so for me, that comes out in terms of like magic and resilience and imagination. And I have Latinx roots in my great grandmother, and so I kind of have taken magical realism and like reformed it to my own devices with that Latin history, but bringing it into the Caribbean and then bringing it into the North American, our North American journey. So that's one way that it appears for me. And yeah, I always write from that West Indian framework because it's so important. And to me, like really misunderstood. Like we're such a small but mighty island, and like people
Yes.
don't really know the difference. Like they might know our food, but they think it's Jamaican, or always we're mistaken for Jamaican. And I'm personally interested in telling our stories. I might not be first generation, but I am a proud Trinidadian citizen. And even like now that the homophobic laws have been temporarily, if not permanently, overturned. We still have to take that to the Privy Council, but it's even a more wonderful time for me to celebrate that identity to me, because it can encompass more of the fullness of who I am.
And I have two questions coming out of what you said. One is an identity-based question, because another identity that we share is that we're both lawyers. And I feel like, no, like I've thought about this. I've thought about who you are and why I just think you're amazing. And also why, like, I'm just so proud that you're writing and creating, because you're the writer that I know who's closest to my own experience. And of course, we want to see ourselves in the work, and our voices are rare, right? So my question is about, how does your legal training and the fact that you are a lawyer, you're an engineer, a technician of the law, how does that impact things like your world building, for example, in this work and perhaps others? And then the second question that I have, arising from what you've just said, is this genealogical work that you did and how it's showing up in your own work. So I'm curious about both of those things.
Yeah. Well, for me, like, I like to engage with the law, obviously indirectly. And my frame of reference for law is mainly criminal. So thinking about the ways in which Black bodies, queer bodies are criminalized has been something that I've explored in my work. And even in this novel and stories, I'm actually able to kind of trace like when it was law and when it's not, like when it's unconstitutional, when it is constitutional, when one lives in fear, when one is liberated. So like I'm having a lot of fun kind of thinking about those things with respect to Trinidad. And then because for me that's one of the laws that really I obviously couldn't see myself. I was pretty outraged when I discovered that myself when I lived there for a time. I like there's a scene where my character like goes to the Nallis library and like looks up the red laws and sees this like buggery stuff, and and I did that myself actually, because it was that was when I was first starting to wrap my mind around like the impacts of colonialism on like how people exist, in their body, authentically, not behind closed doors. And like I'd heard a lot of stories around like family members or like family friends, being kind of abused and maligned and growing up in the shadow of their queerness due to other family members' judgment. So that's something that I resonate with and incorporate in my work. And then I guess like in my Toronto context, police violence, police brutality, abolition with respect to police and prisons. That's work that I engage with through my theater work.
And so there's a lot there, and I imagine that writers see writing as an opportunity to reclaim narratives and to rewrite narratives and to piece things together. And you referred to the being a child of the diaspora. Has writing fiction helped you piece things together?
I think so. Like, and to go back to your previous question around like new writers, what I really encourage people to do is find that authentic voice. So for me, not being sure whether I can claim queer identity or not because of my bisexuality. Like, like it's a complicated narrative, but somebody once told me that it's actually important to claim that space. It's actually important to stand in that voice and create from that voice, because it's so important and so necessary, and could save so many lives, like from either end, from self-work, from self-love, to like external homophobia, transphobia, all of those things. And so for me, it's important to claim that voice, and it's important for other people to do that work too, because I feel like the more that we're all authentic in our creating, not just from a commercial standpoint or like what we think will get funding, what we think will get support or praise, I think doing more of that actually has a social impact. And my work, I create from a place of like social engagement, community engagement. And so like for me, an artist isn't just somebody who makes pretty things. They also engage with real issues, and really try to make a concrete impact through that art.
And your bio reflects that, right? You've just mentioned theater now, and I know that you draw from the arts generally in a lot of different ways. I mean, even just looking at your website, you've got short works, you've got this novel that you're talking about, you're into sort of the digital animated world, which I want to talk to you about, and you just mentioned theater. So did you always feel entitled to own and marshal the arts? Or was it a journey for you to feel like you could stand strong in the arts as a creator, but also as an educator, and then a community engager?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'm gonna assume or think that, being West Indian, you had the same kind of talk, and being a lawyer, you had the same kind of talk. You have to have a profession. You have to have a profession. So, for me, in high school particularly, like I always wrote, like from very young, as they would say. And so I was always writing, always sharing my stuff with my friends, but they wouldn't really get it, but they were kind enough to indulge me. And then in high school, I really started getting into performance and theater. And there was a point where I wanted to either do like filmmaking or become an actor, and that was obviously off the table. I needed to find a profession, so my parents kind of forced me into the literal boxes of like engineer, doctor, lawyer. And so I did take up that space, because for me, that is still obviously a worthwhile endeavor. Like knowing the law, you can marshal it, you can defend yourself, defend your community, and do a lot of good. So for me, that time and that training was very valuable, and I wanted to take it up because the opportunity was there for me to do so. But while I was doing my master's, I found this thing called community engaged arts, and I was like, this is what I want to be doing. I want to be making art for and with my community, sharing our stories, our voices, for a wider audience. And even within that work, I saw how white the art scene is in Toronto, and in Canada generally. And I really railed against that. So I was like, I explicitly work with Black folks. I explicitly work on Black stories. And I did a lot of those like kind of Black only closed spaces, because I was like, we just need that nourishment. We need that time and that space and that energy, for ourselves. And I worked really hard to figure out how we can kind of start reclaiming like resources and breaking down a lot of the gatekeeping and power structures. And so like with all of that, now I'm actually in a position to be that gatekeeper, to be able to, divert funds to more BIPOC folks, and away from the people who've always historically gotten these just because they have a name and name recognition. So yeah, like that's that was really something I had to go on a journey to do, because that's what usually happens to us. Like we're usually kind of stuck in survival mode rather than thriving. And I want to see a world where I can thrive as an artist and I can help others thrive as artists. Because to me, our stories are usually way more pressing and way more imaginative, yet for some reason, they don't always get their due.
I remember being a student of yours in an Afrofuturism writing workshop, which was amazing. It was amazing to like just like sit at your feet, but also amazing to be among others sitting at your feet, writing. And it was such I remember just going around with pieces that we had written in the moment and some of the prompts that you gave us in the safe space for Black to be the default. And that was really powerful. And I think that if Black students had access to that kind of safe writing space sooner in life, earlier in life, or at all in some cases, we would have more of this work, I think, in Canada, because I know that even now, like I have dreams of writing things, and I go to the odd workshop here and there, and I have lots of people in my life who are just like, and Jerry, stop playing the fool and actually write a thing, please put it out there. But I just feel like even the space of writing has been colonized, right? And like, who gets to be called a writer, and who, like, at what point do you become a writer? Like, all of that is space that we're kind of fighting for.
Because yeah, I'm very interested in how we pass down our burden and our beauty.
Mm-hmm. How we pass down our burden and our beauty. Yes. There's so much, that was very poetic, and there's so much visual stuff that comes out of that. So yes. And I feel like a lot of this work of reclaiming, and your work seems to me to kind of be an expression of the Sankofa principle. Like, I see this a lot, right? That you can't have one without the other. We are beautiful, we are beautiful in spite of, perhaps even because of, the burdens we carry and our abilities to carry. I mean, I chose to wear Harriet today for our conversation because of the connection to Canada, but the bringing back, like, Harriet Tubman was so committed to her family and going back over and over and over again, and couldn't rest and didn't rest, right? Because she couldn't get everybody in her family back. We hear a lot about her as somebody who freed enslaved Africans, but one of her main motivators was to get her family, her parents, her siblings, their children, to freedom as part of that. And she never lost sight of that. And I knew that we would be getting into topics of family, and going back again and creating something new, but never forgetting to go back. And I think that is something that is pretty unique to diasporic, the diasporic experience, especially in Canada, which is, heralded for being so multicultural. So I wonder about, do you think that there's something unique that children of the diaspora have to offer Afrofuturism, and in particular, perhaps people who have ancestry not only in Canada or living in Canada, but have ancestry in the West Indies, but also on the African continent? Like, our path doesn't often move through the United States. What's unique about that journey for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as somebody who has lived on pretty much all sides of the Middle Passage Triangle. Like I did my law degree in the UK. I experienced what it's like to be Black there. Let me tell you. You know,
Great.
I
I've
lived
heard
in
it's great. I couldn't even can't even pretend to be serious. Yeah.
I've lived in Trinidad and I've lived in the US and I'm you know from here, born here. For me, there's still so much to contend with. Like, you know, the Queen is still our head of state. Like to me, it's an everyday, ongoing, in your face. We are holding up colonialism. We are holding up this history right in your face. You know, every time somebody, you know, you have to take an oath. So you have to take an oath to become a lawyer. You have to take an oath to work for the government. Like to her, you know, pledging allegiance to her. Like it's just, to me, we have a lot to offer in that resistance, because I feel like in the States, they long threw that off, got rid of that, done that, you know, did their own thing. But like here, specifically in Canada, specifically in the UK, and it's so ever present. And even in Trinidad, obviously, they got rid of colonialism as well, and they're a republic. But I feel like specifically as a Canadian with that heritage, it's very disconcerting, disrespectful, and I kind of just rail against it, you know, privately and in my work, especially in Mild Stone, which, you know, as I said, traces that history, because it goes from like a pre independence Trinidad to a post independence Trinidad to Canada to the US, and kind of looks at white supremacy as its own kind of evil magic, like a dark magic. Yeah, that, you know, reaches a critical point. But, you know, there is constant resistance within the characters, like love for themselves and each other. So yeah, I think we have that memory in a way that US Afrofuturists slash, you know, people who aren't, you know, historians have, to daily, as a daily reminder, to remind people that not everyone is free.
Yeah.
And I don't consider myself free until I can be the head of state of the place I was born in.
Yeah. I completely hear you. I have, as a result of my work in Booktube, I now have a lot of African American friends. It's just like an explosion of African American friends, which is amazing. And I don't think I really understood, and I can't say I fully understand now, but I don't think that I even got close to understanding what it's like to be, and what it means to be African American. In that I've always assumed two degrees of separation from the motherland. I've never contemplated just one. And so being twice removed means something to me, and it impacts how like disconnected I feel from my people being the first here. Whereas I have African American friends, I read African American works from people who know what plantation their great grandparents were on and were enslaved on. I know somebody who lives driving distance from the plantation that her great grandmother was enslaved on. And that, to be so close to that, you know, the whole idea of dreaming forward and creating is different from, you know, what the experience would be if we would have to go back through the Caribbean in order to get, you know, to get home and to figure out what it means. Also, immigration as an emancipatory act, right? You know, moving to Canada in an effort to start something new, for example, right? And that whole experience being one that perhaps is influenced by a certain degree of agency, but certainly, impacted by the views that we have about, like, my parents didn't choose to, immigrate to Africa, right? Or anywhere, or to the US or anywhere else. There's a deliberate choice to be here, which is something that I want to explore and don't fully understand, to be frank. So let's talk about the work that you're currently doing. I want to ask you about Mixed Up. I want to ask you about what it means to put an animated series together. Like, how, like, I'm moved by, I keep on calling it giving yourself permission to do this, but I'm just, the breadth of your work is, to me, it feels so bold, right? That you're doing it all. So how did you even get to a digital animated series for children? Like, how did that happen? And when is it going to happen? And what's the story all about? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So as I had mentioned, like in high school, filmmaking was something I was interested in. Post-university, I kind of dabbled a bit in screenwriting, like taking instructions from, like, if you ever get into film, you'll hear Robert McKee's story, like this giant tome from this older white man who's considered like the kind of story screenwriting guru in Hollywood. So I took a lot of his instruction, kind of digested it, and kind of circled the industry until recently, where I don't know if you know about the kind of the BIPOC TV and film kind of movement in Toronto, but basically there are some kind of screenwriting professionals who kind of came up through the ranks and are doing that whole looking back. And so I got into this kids TV writing boot camp a couple of years ago that they ran for free, just like taking a whole bunch of young BIPOC wannabe screenwriters, aspiring screenwriters, and really giving them detailed instruction on how to write a sample script of their own kind of series. And so at that time, actually, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Sankofa, because I wrote a kind of time travel story around the principles of Sankofa, and Maya Angelou, who's, I stare at on my wall. But yeah, so like, we're imagining some kids kind of meeting her in their contemporary society. And that screenplay went on to do pretty well. And so I kind of took a break from that. But last year during the pandemic, somebody reached out to me and said that they had received funding from the Canada Council, tons of applications. I think she said there were like 1,500 applications, and she was one of like 17, I think, or something. And she was the only one that was pitching like kids content. And so she kind of had this loose idea around BIPOC joy for children, 10-year-olds specifically. But she didn't have too much more than that. So she was looking for somebody to kind of help her develop a series that we would eventually apply for more funding to see if we can make it. And so we worked during the pandemic, the previous height of the pandemic, because we're kind of in a height now, but tirelessly to like shape this story that we're calling Mixed Up, which is Afro-Trinidadian girl named Makoya, who comes to this Scarborough neighborhood after her parents have pretty much separated. So she's kind of trying to figure out how to get them back together. And she comes to this community center where there are these kids from this Scarborough neighborhood. And she meets up with this girl named Shri, who's a North Indian girl who's also 10, and their friend Bo, who's a 10-year-old Filipino boy. And basically they have all these mysterious adventures surrounding ooze, green ooze, that for us kind of represents community change, but through gentrification. So change that's not welcomed and that pushes people out. And so they're kind of battling this ooze that manifests itself in different ways and has different properties. But for me, I love doing work for kids because that to me, that imagination is just limitless. And again, like as you're saying, like it needs to start from young. So like my co-creator Nanya Uri, her motivation was that she had a 6-year-old who just couldn't see herself on TV, and so she wanted to create something for her. And while I don't have my own children, I create with that Black girl in mind, of like, you're feeling kind of different. Maybe your family doesn't understand you. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe you're queer. You don't know what it is yet, but you need to keep dreaming. You need to keep striving and being yourself and being that authentic self. And so it's just about these 2 girls really who are being themselves and kind of uplifting community and growing up and navigating all of those things together, but mixed up.
The only problem I have with that is that it wasn't Rexdale. Everything else I'm good with. This is great. Sounds perfect. If you need to write in a cousin from the West Side, I will help you with that. I just want to make sure it's balanced. That sounds so beautiful. And what's funny? So having grown up in Rexdale, for me, and I went to high school in Rexdale, it was normal, like that combination of ethnicities. So my school had a huge Black population, a huge Filipino population, a huge, did we have a huge South Asian population at that time? I don't think, not so much. The Filipino population was bigger at the time. But it was normal for me to hear lots of different languages in the hallways, lots of different food, dance at the dances at our high school, and in elementary school, it was even more culturally and racially diverse for me growing up in Etobicoke. So that the notion of mixed up, the notion of gentrification that was happening while I was in school as well, not to the extent that it's happening now, but that's really current, right? And I feel like 10, grade 5 is also such a magical age. If you're in the public school system, I guess you're middling, you're in middle school already, I guess at 10. Is that right?
Yeah. Just about, yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. So what stage are you at right now, and when can I watch it, most importantly?
Yeah, so we were successful in getting that second round of funding. So I think we were one of maybe 7 or 8 or 9 projects that were selected for production in partnership with the CBC and the Canada Council. And so we are currently, as I learned, you kind of pitch one thing, you do all this hard work, you develop a show, and then the broadcaster kind of comes back with something else. And so thankfully we originally pitched kind of doing a pilot of an 11-minute series, and now we've been asked to do a whole first season of little micro episodes of 3 minutes each. And so another thing that I learned is that, even though you have money and you have support, you have to kind of find more. So we're in the waiting on kind of some more funding results phase, but otherwise we're kind of in pre-production, kind of redeveloping the show for that first season, and then we're hoping to be in production kind of throughout the summer and fall, and with a release in next spring. So it takes a while. It has a lot of lead up, but we're also kind of hoping to adapt it to a kids book series. Because another thing in doing research for this project was that I literally went to chapters and I scoped out all of the books that had even kids of color on the front that are for, ages 6 to 12, and there were just not that many, or they were ones that I'd read 100 years ago. So we're really trying to bring center BIPOC kids, but like girls that can have adventure, because that's another thing that mostly girls' stories are about relationships and chores, or like kind of girls don't seem to have permission to like be adventurous, be as bold and loud and big and take up as much space as possible and go on wild adventures and save the world. Whereas it's a lot of boys' stories that are doing that. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Like we want to give girls that permission, and BIPOC girls specifically.
How hard is it to introduce queerness into children's literature? And children, anything for children, because it's something that I struggle with. There are, I read a lot of children's, well, no, I lie. I don't read a lot of children's, but I seek out children's literature. And because I want children's literature that allows children to have the room. It's not that I need children to be queer, because that's weird. It's not that. It's that I need them to not be told they can't be. And it's funny because, in terms of how Caribbean children are brought up, and I think I can speak to that with authority, is that girls, we have no concept of non-binary children. That's just not a thing. And if you encourage a child to be non-binary, you're harming the child. But girls are very much expected to be brought up in this very, very rigid way that's defined, not only by the typical girl stuff, but also defined by respectability politics in the context, in contrast to whiteness, right? Often as a protective gesture, right? And then of course boys as well are encouraged to do a lot of things. Like one of the things I don't like about how we raise girls and boys in the Caribbean is I do think that we encourage, for all the concern about introducing kids to the notion of queerness really early, we definitely encourage them to be heterosexual right out of the gate, right? With like kiss your this person, oh, you have a little girlfriend, or oh, like you're flirting. You're 5, you're not flirting, you just want right? So we do all of this. And so I just find it really strange that there's so much pressure to not have queer characters. So my question to you is, number one, do you see this speculative world as a speculative world that you're building for children? Is it a space where queer kids can be? And how do you deal with that when you're dealing with kids who aren't white and who have to face racism, and probably in our world would have parents who wouldn't support their queerness, at least at such a young age?
Yeah, it's definitely something that is top of mind for us. Like one way we're thinking of dealing is with it is that there's like a layer of little bit older kids, like who
Right.
are expressing non-binary gender, like all kinds of different gender and sexual orientations, possibly in the parents, and even just having like, so our boy character, like maybe he likes to paint his nails, like these are things that we've, maybe he likes to wear a skirt, like just different expressions for these kids. And like, while it's not explicitly they have this orientation or that, it's just that they're able to be fluid, they're able to express, and for me that is queering something, without explicitly saying, because 10, do you really have sexual feelings? Like some do, but not necessarily, because we also don't generally want to talk about like crushes, and because again it's like that's feeding into the typical narrative. Like this is about adventure and relationships and finding out who you are.
Yeah.
And who you are could manifest itself in many different ways. And so like for sure this is a like it's a multi-faith, multicultural, multi-ethnic, and like kind of pansexual, etc. Space, because you know, why limit your imagination? Like this is a made-up world. Like why give it those confines? And I totally agree. Like I definitely was that kid who was told you can't leave the house without a purse, and I was constantly chastised about that. Like,
for me it was earrings.
Where's your purse? Yeah, I mean, like I like jewelry, but purses, I was like, no.
I went through a I don't want to wear earrings phase, and I love earrings. I just like to choose my earrings and when I wear them. But I remember Sunday morning, my mother would like on our way to church, she would turn around and like, earrings, and it was like a thing. I would have to go back inside and put studs in my ears and come back, right? And then it just got to a point where I was just like, no, like this is a no earring Sunday today, Mom. Let's go. Right?
Very good. Very
yeah,
good.
we're good. And it eventually worked out, but that was something that was very, very real for me. So my second last question for you is about your written work. So you've talked about the novel and the collection of stories that you're working on. What can you tell us at this point about that? And when can I expect to have it on my shelves is basically.
Yeah, like I feel like your first book is like the best time of your life as a writer, because I like, for me, I'm pre-agent, so like I don't have anyone asking me for it. I can just dream as much as I want. So one thing I've been doing is I've been kind of getting mentorship from all kinds of different writers. So like I had Olive Senior look at it. It was amazing. And I had recently Tia Lim, who did An Ocean of Minutes.
Yes.
Yes.
Right here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and she kind of did the last kind of reframing for me around what I'm really trying to say. And so that's the point I'm at, like really honing that in before potentially shopping it around. So I don't know, like maybe in the next couple of years if we're lucky. But as I said, to me it's like it's the juiciest time, and people are like, get an agent, get it. But like it's this is great. You will never have this again. You will forever write on a deadline from now on. You know, like as soon as you make those decisions and those moves. So I'm just really enjoying like figuring out the story that I want to say, and the story of my heart and my dreams, because you know it's a journey. It's a long journey, and my book has gone through many iterations and changes, and I really want to capture I want to capture a long moment in time and talk about Blackness, colonization, magic, and queerness to the best of my ability. So taking my time with it. Sorry.
I respect your boundaries. I'll just say that I'm ready. I'll be ready in 3 years or whenever, but I'm ready. So I expect an email when I can access it. And then I will not bug you about it again. I probably will, but I will try not to bug you about it. So I guess, you know what? I think this is a good place to pause until our next conversation. Unless there's anything that you'd like to share before we wrap up this chat about anything that you'd like people to know who might be hearing about your work for the first time.
Yeah, I guess I just want to thank you so much for having me here for this chat. And yeah, I would encourage folks to kind of look into, if they're interested in writing, look into this method called the Amherst Writers and Artists Method, which is a method of writing that I use, and I used in that workshop that you attended. Which is, it was founded by a woman named Pat Schneider in the States, and she kind of done her MFA and felt really alienated by that and wanted to work with folks who were more marginalized and had different, marginalized identities, but didn't feel like they could own writing. And so that method kind of teaches that writing belongs to everyone. And creates non-hierarchical spaces to write in community. And so a lot of the work that I do is either taking those workshops or facilitating them. And, if you're feeling stuck, especially in this time, and you want like a community, there's a lot of places that you can go for free workshops daily, almost multiple times a day if you'd like, and write in this way. And what that entails is that it's a confidential space. You can kind of feel free to write whatever you want to a timed prompt. You can share it, you can not share it, and other people offer positive reinforcement, like positive feedback for your work. And so they tell you what stayed, what was strong. And just, I find like writing in that way is such a beautiful way to get your story out and heard at the same time. Or even, encourages you to go deeper. So that's something I would let people know. And currently, Amherst Writers and Artists organization is having its annual fundraiser called Right Around the World, and it's happening right now. So there's also a ton more workshops that you could take for, I think, a $5 donation, and they're happening daily throughout the month of May. So,
oh wow, okay, thank you.
It happens every year. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And thank you very much for being part of the series.
Thank you so much.